Thank you, Bev, for coming on. Really, really excited to chat.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
My first question, I enjoy putting these questions together because obviously following the 2015 World Cup and the one last year, different types of pressure, different type of exposure. Two teams that I followed very, very closely were Canada and England. You were obviously there firsthand. So on the preparation side, I wanted to ask you, I mean, how did both camps differ in their preparation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and probably has been the main difference, really, from both sort of sides. I think Canada, the NWSL season, I do think that promotes going into a major tournament in the summer, because what I found with England is that they're coming off the back of a really heavy season with Champions League, etc. So our build-up was very different. In Canada, it was more of a residency program. So had the players for a significant amount of time due to the NWSL season, and then they're obviously coming into it ramped up, ready to go to a major tournament. With England, we decided, because of the calendar, the domestic calendar, and players in Champions League, etc., we went for more of a mini camp model. So we were in 4 or 5 days, players could go home for 2 or 3 days, come back in. And the premise was that basically by the day 52 of a major tournament, how fresh is that player going to be off the back of a season? So it was very different, probably different outcomes as well. I think when you have those mini camps, it's all about hard work, intense work, go away, refresh, come back in, hard work, go away, refresh. I think when you're in a residency model, you're working on yourself, tactical adaptability, and you're working on different concepts. So very different. And obviously the home World Cup with Canada, you've also got the added home pressure. It's in your face, for the 4 years leading up to it. It's there from the outset. So two very different experiences, and both unique and different in their own right.
Yeah, I'll get to the pressure questions later on, but in the tournament format, and we're all, I suppose, accustomed now with mainstream media, with the 2010 especially, the World Cup, that England go to South Africa and apparently get bored stupid in a camp.
Yeah.
Got every gadget for every player, all the computers, blah, blah, blah. In that tournament format, how do you get the balance right between this relaxation and looseness and then that intensity and focus on the details that you're going to need?
I think it's actually the key to teams that win major tournaments. I think a lot of time needs to be spent, I think, when you go into a major tournament, planning. And it's not the exciting thing. We all want to be on the grass working every day, but we spent a lot of time. I can still remember the World Cup planning meetings at St. George's Park with England. We spent a lot of time scrutinising the schedule and understanding why have we put that there? Is that, put yourself in the player's shoe, is that what they really need? And essentially what I think the main thing is being brave. So by day 52 of a major tournament, the brave thing to do for me would be to actually give them days off. And a lot of coaches, we all want to win, we're all competitive. You have a tendency to cram and think, but we need that extra session. We're going to play US in the semi-final. Like we need extra time on the grass. And actually, I thought in some of the brave things we did, we gave players time off. Our match day -3. So you imagine you play match day -4 is sort of recovery, top up players that didn't get what they needed. And then match day -3 throughout the tournament, not every time. We dropped that in there based on location, based on, how many accumulated days we'd had. And then you sort of ramp back into match day -2 where they need to tune in and tune out. And then I think the second thing is players recover and need different things. So if I look in the England setup, you'll see online, I mean, Jill Scott loves a cup of coffee. That's her relaxation, is to go to a coffee shop and relax. Other players, their feet are up and they're in a bed relaxing. And then other players are more 24/7, like Nikita Paris, Tony Duggan. There's a group basically that all need different things. And I think as coaches, we have to recognise that, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, really.
Yeah, on that days off there, we're all finished the Michael Jordan, that 10-part series. And then you've got the clip of him, I think he's on the golf course, and he's basically saying a younger coach would have had us training right now.
Yes.
Phil knows to give it. how much when you is that another balancing act then, that the balancing act of planning and then that intuition to say, look at someone in the eye and say, hey, they might need a day here?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the big thing. We put all this time into planning. And I remember us saying at the time, like, this is going to change when we get there. Like, why are we spending all this time? But the reality is, I think the best coaches can read players, can read their gut, know if the session or the spark in their eye in a meeting isn't there. Like, I think that's the adaptability. And then you also have the relationship in your culture where we had a captain's group, and it was the same with Canada, where you have that sort of player-coach relationship where you get that sort of feedback, and it can't all be one way because they ultimately have to step on the pitch and perform under pressure.
Did you go to other sports in any account where it was trying to get, I mean, was the priority to engage the players, or was it like, listen, their downtime, if they want to, like you mentioned there, if they want to go for a coffee, they want to sit at home, like, was that something that you also looked at?
Yeah, and I think some of it, Phil, obviously in his experiences in the men's game, I think it was a big learning for him, because essentially when it was said rest time in the schedule, he was like, well, they should be in their rooms with their feet up, relaxing. But I think the culture, and particularly more in the women's game, I feel they call it coffee club. The girls like to sit around, have a chat, and I'm the same. That's my relaxation, is to sort of just. So I think it's a sort of a two-way process, and over time, over the camps, probably back end of the year before, we started to tweak and change. And what does rest look like? When is a compulsory rest? When is it, in your own time, get away, do what you need to do? And I think we got the real good balance of feedback from players to get that right. And I would say on day, we didn't get to 52, we got to 51 of that major tournament. I would say it's the freshest I've been. It's probably the freshest some of the other players have been, and I think we did get that bit right.
Brilliant. Whenever assistant coach, these relationships and so many different roles, so many hats you wear as assistant coach, but I suppose a big one is always this consistency of the buffer between, the players and the head coach. And curious to get your thoughts on, international football doesn't give you that time to, I suppose that club football gives you that natural time to build these relationships with players. So how do you do that leading up to tournaments from a personal point of view?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think I look at this sort of two ways. One, I think it's understanding what the head coach is like and what they might need around them. And I also think it's how you operate away from the environment. So I touch it two parts. If I look at the sort of roles, and so Phil is very good and he has a great relationship with players. So arguably, if you've got a head coach who's like that, your assistant maybe doesn't need to be as much like that. If I compare when I was a head coach in Canada with the youth system, I had a lot of ex-players, Candice Chapman, Carmeline Moscato, Rian Wilkinson. When you've got those sorts of assistants, they were great at getting around the players, which meant that as a head coach, I was more in the trenches, tactics, etc. But I think if you've got more of an analytical assistant, then maybe as a head coach, you're the one who builds the relationship. So I think you all, as a team, you look for certain, as different staff members. So with Phil, I think I've got that balance where I don't actually have to be that conduit, because he actually has a really good relationship, but we value it a lot, both of us, whether I was a head coach or assistant coach. I don't think these days you can get the best out of players without having that relationship. So a lot of my relationships and Phil's would be, we go to the games every week. We connect with the player after a game, so they know we're watching, they know we care, and I think that's a big part of coaching. And then we also work a lot on individual development plans away from camp. So you get that sort of dialogue a lot between camps. And then on camp, I think just culture, where you'll sit and have a coffee with the player and it's in relaxed time and it's not all about coaching. So I think what you do away from international coaching is actually a lot of your job, not just on camp.
Yeah, I want to go back there to, like, when you go watch a player, so say you go and watch Jill and she plays against Arsenal.
Yeah.
Do you grab her after the game? Is it a call? Is it a text? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I think mainly we sort of let them do their club thing after a game. So it's normally a text or a call. It could be immediately after. Sometimes it's just a great game. Other times they've asked for specific feedback, and you're going in depth. So I think it varies, but generally we'll leave them with their club. We don't want to interfere, obviously, with what their club coaches have asked of them. But when we're watching them, we're looking for the things that we've sort of sat down with them and said, these are the areas you need to improve. So that's always sort of a Sunday, Monday. That's sort of how we operate, really.
You said in an interview that John Herdman and Phil's both two different, very, very different style of coaches. I was curious to see were there, and if so, where were the similarities with the way they wanted to build their environments with the teams?
Yeah, it's a really good question. They are very different and probably have come from very different backgrounds and experiences to get them where they are today. So if you say where are they similar, I think I'd have to say they're both winners, and winners in different ways. How they go about trying to win might look different, but I would say definitely winners where they're at it 24/7. Both find it very difficult to switch off from the game, very obsessive in making sure that everything's right for competition, etc. So I would say probably that, in that they both have that sort of winning mindset, and the details are important to them. I think that's probably the similarities. The differences are probably more their management styles, even how they might tactically approach the game. But I think naturally some common traits in good leaders, they're winners for sure.
The early morning runs that you did with England, like I noticed this with I think Gareth Southgate did it with his staff as well, where they get up and they all do it together. I mean, can you talk a bit about what that does, I suppose, with consistency of messaging, and also then what that does with relationships with staff?
Yeah, it's funny, even going back to Canada, I remember the 2016 Olympics in Rio. I lost so much weight in that Olympics because every morning, 6 o'clock, meet John at the lift, and we were out. And it was the only way, when you think about, especially Olympics, it's tighter turnarounds. So you're absolutely exhausted, and the travel, etc. So it was the only way for me to be able to perform, because you're just so tired. And I find, as you know, exercise, it energizes you. And then coming to England, it's been something actually in the lockdown. I think we're in week 10, week 11. Phil, every Saturday morning, we've had the staff lionesses HIIT session. So his brother Gary's personal trainer, she'll do a HIIT session with us. All the staff are on, their partners, wives, husbands, even kids sometimes. And we do this crazy hard HIIT workout. And we've done like Barry's boot camps. And a big part of the culture on camp is that, attack the day is sort of his philosophy. Him, his wife, his family, they're up before 5 every morning. But the workout, I think it's more than just sort of, part of the culture. I think when you set your alarm to go and work out with staff members, if you don't turn up, you're letting them down. That's how I personally feel. It's a way that all the staff come together, they connect, it's competitive, we all want to win. Even now we're texting our 5K sort of scores to each other. I just think it breeds sort of high performance, because we know that it makes you better. It's a way of connecting. You sit round, have a coffee afterwards, have breakfast, everyone turns up at the same time. I just think it's for when I'm a number one again in the future, it'll be a big part of, it can be walking. You don't have to be the fittest person in the world, but I do think it's a habit, and it's discipline, and it's part of being in a high performance environment.
You mentioned there before about the coach today has to be able to connect. Is that another necessity of connecting on a physical, almost on a, listen, I'm in a growth period as well, kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I even think, like, when you're working out and you're exercising, you're having a coffee afterwards. I always catch up with a goalkeeping coach afterwards with a coffee, as an example. That's where you have all your ideas and you connect, or you'll say, I've been thinking about yesterday's session, we need to connect in with so-and-so. You have all your best ideas in them moments. So I just think it promotes high performance and just connecting, really.
Brilliant. All right, moving it now to bench life. And again, I think this is something that I'm fascinated about, having been an assistant coach, because you think whenever you're watching games that everyone's just waiting for something to happen, until you do it, you realize that there's actually work to be done down there. What's your role are in that there once the game starts? What are you looking for, and what are you trying to, I suppose, get the info on when the game goes?
Yeah, I think just to give some context probably for those listening, the way we work at England, we've got Phil, myself, and the goalkeeping coach down on the bench, and actually now an analyst with the new rules from the World Cup. Then we have another coach up in we call it sort of eye in the sky, and an analyst up there. And our goalkeeping coach has got a earpiece in and gets information down. I think with that context, my role during the game is to be one step ahead. That's how I'd summarise it. So game's kicked off. We've got information coming down which is very objective. But I would like to think, and I've had this debate in my head around where am I best suited. I think on the bench, I've lived a lot of experience as a head coach on the side of a pitch. And I think that smell or that gut feel, as well as seeing what's happening in front of you, I can anticipate because of experiences that you've been through around this. I can see they're doing this, or it feels like we've had a lot of transitions in the last 5 minutes. We need to take care of this. So I would say my role is being one step ahead on what's happening and digesting that. My next thing is probably to read what information Phil needs and if he needs it, because I know I've been a head coach where you're on the sideline in international tournaments where there's pressure, scrutiny, big moments, and it can become too much clutter because you can't actually think. So I would say what I've got to be very good at is reading what he needs, when he needs it. If an incident's happened 3 or 4 times, I'm like, right, need to address that. If it's happened once, I just tend to leave him. So one step ahead, read emotion, what does he need, how concise can I be, and then how much can I tap into the goalkeeping coach next to me who's getting the information from upstairs, really. So that's probably the biggest thing on the side. And then obviously another big component of that is preparing subs and even giving them the final messaging and everything that goes with that, which is a skill in itself. You know, recently we gave some debuts to some very young players, and the same in Canada. In their moments, knowing what those kids need to hear. You know, you're going on against US, you're 18 years old. You know, they've openly said to me, I'm absolutely, you know, and in those moments, I think it's the calm, collected, actually just go and do what you do best and giving them that, you know, and reading that. And I think that's the art of it, really, being on the side of the pitch. I think you've got to have that gut feel.
You've fulfilled many roles, tournament settings. So you mentioned there the being upstairs, observing from a higher vantage point, assistant coach on the bench, head coach. How do all three of these interact, and how do they vary towards the halftime impact?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because really, I think the best teams and the best coaches use their halftime. Like, I think it can go and win you games. It can cost you games. So I think the interaction of all of those parts going into halftime are really important. So being up in the sky, we call it eye in the sky back in Canada, is you were very more, you could remove the emotion. You were just watching. It was like watching it on a video, really, a tactical video. You're just watching the X's and O's, and you're basically going, right, 5 minutes in, yep, their shapes as is. I'm going to put that down on the radio. You know, you're a bit more sort of, you've got a script that you're working through that you're impacting down on the bench. I would say bench obviously is all emotion, or it can be emotion if you let it. But going into half time, I think the key is the simplicity at half time. And I think this is actually where Phil is at his best. So if I look at the interaction of how we tend to work going into half time, is we'd have 3 points in possession, 3 points out of possession, written down, and probably 10 minutes before we go in. Phil isn't engaged in this, he's managing the game. Myself, the goalkeeping coach, the coach upstairs, we're radioing to the analyst to go into the changing room and sort of list, right, we need to take care of these 3 things in and out of possession, so that when we walk in as a coaching group, and Phil might have all this emotion as well, and he's got to be able to vent in those sort of 4 minutes, it's up there, and there's no sort of like, you can go off on tangents. I've learned the hard way that at half time, before you know it, the players have been sat for 12 minutes waiting for you to go and impact them. So we have a really good process that there's the sort of objective. Phil will digest that, or he'll say, what do you mean by that? He'll then go, I'm going to address these 1 or 2 things. And a lot of the time with Phil, again, I think this is where he's brilliant, it's sometimes just emotion. And actually, as the assistant, as soon as he's finished talking, I'll go and then pick on some of the little details or individuals of the wider things that we've put up on the board. And even in Canada, John was very big, and I was as a head coach, have even shown clips at halftime to impact the players. So I think the key is, for me, all three roles have to interact and has to be a process around it. Otherwise, like I say, before you know it, the halftime's over and actually the players have left with probably tens and thousands of messages, as well as all their emotion that they're carrying for the game, and they're exhausted in a tournament with heat, etc. So I think those interactions are really key, and I think probably it can be underestimated how good it is having a process.
Yeah, something that's not talked about enough, is it really? Like how to be a good halftime coach.
Yeah, but you know what? It is true. Game day coaching is its own, particularly in tournament settings, I think, because of the nature of it, extra time, everything, penalty processes. Again, the roles of those people in those moments, we had a set process that if we got to penalties, who would stand where, who would do what. I think that's the planning that you go through.
So was there a process? The toughest one I always found was extra time. In college, they have it automatically, so you get it. You might get it 5 times a season over here. And personally, I'd always get there and I'd say, I don't know what to say now because we've got a decent result here. Do we go win it? Do we not?
Yes.
I mean, is that a pre-plan based on game? Is that because there's so much emotion in that one, right?
Yeah, and I think, we always do, same in Canada, same in England, what if planning beforehand. And when you're in a knockout round, that's what you start to plan for. What's the momentum like? What subs might you need? These are all the planning that you do before, because again, what I've learned probably the hard way is when you're playing, let's say US, in them games, seconds count, and you haven't got time to be sat there thinking, oh, we need to now chase the game, so let's go 3 at the back. And you can't be sat there working out who goes where. You need to have that pre-planned, or at least to a point where there's flexibility and gut feel and everything that goes with it. But I think the planning part of game day coaching, again, I think you're right. It's a skill in itself, and only when you accumulate experiences. I remember my first World Cup. I was in a knockout against Ghana, red card, like all these moments that, and luckily enough, then I had all the planning done beforehand. If I didn't, these are the sorts of lessons that you learn a lot along the way.
Yeah, so, and I won't ask you to go into it, but an example of that could be whenever the game, it was a Cameroon game that was it just went completely off script. Did that then allow you to kind of move them back into a state at halftime and help them?
Yeah, and I think, again, we focused on the process and some of our values as well. I think actually that was a massive cultural moment, because we got to display our values by how we acted on the pitch, no matter what was happening. I remember it's the most bizarre game I've ever been involved with. I remember Phil saying to Phil on the bench, like, what do we do here? Like, and I'm getting wound up. And he actually said to me, Bev, just leave it, and I think that calm and composure and those moments, actually, those experiences, if I come up against that in the future, I've actually experienced it, and I know that the way we handled ourselves actually helped us. It didn't hinder us, because it's very easy in those moments to react in a certain way.
Brilliant. Okay, last few, and then I'll get a couple from the coaches on here. Looking towards, I mean, we just talked before we went on air about the growth of the league, and then you've also got, you mentioned there about the young English players that are now making their debut coming through. When you look at that, I suppose, just about to turn professional, I'm always really fascinated by ages 16 to 18. What are you looking? What are the key areas that you're looking for those young players now in the English game to develop as they progress towards world-class standards?
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. And a lot of my experiences in Canada, that was sort of my remit, really. My core role was to look after the youth teams in the system and progress players through into the first team. And what I learned very quickly is, and it's a little bit different here in England, I think for a young player to accelerate early, so if I think about for the North American audience, it'd be like Jessie Fleming. Mm-hmm. She was 14, 15, Jordan Heitmer in Canada. Now you're Georgia Stanways and Lauren Hemp, people like that. What I learned very quickly, to do it early, and doing it early isn't the only way. I've learned that you have to be exceptional at something. So, for example, Jessie Fleming was technical, very technical. She was exceptionally technically gifted in a team that needed some technical sort of excellence. Jordan Heitemer, physically, absolutely gifted. Lauren Hemp, gifted physically. So to be exceptional in an area, I think, as a young player, and if you are, you have a chance to accelerate quicker. But I think that doesn't mean that that's the only way. And actually going through progressively might set you up better long term to be in a system. So what do I look for in youth players? I think what I've learned is that young players do extra. Those young players that are hungry and do extra go all the way, and they have some self-responsibility. So if you run a session and a player turns up and their mindset is, well, all right, I just rock up to this session, or, you know, what are you going to do for me in this session? If you reverse that and go, well, what are you going to get out of this session? What have you turned up to actually get out of the session? Those players who have that sort of inner drive, who have clear goals, know where they're going, and as coaches, our job is to help them obviously establish those things. But I do think self-responsibility, hunger is really, really important, not just talent, which, you know, I'm speaking to people who obviously know this. And bravery, I think, is another key component that I look for. Players who are brave to get on the ball, even when, let's say, the ball's been given away 3 or 4 times in a row, I'll always look for the player who goes to get it again. Because I actually think those brave players are the players that in the future you're going to need in big moments. So I think exceptional in a few areas, that sort of added desire. Like I look now, I'm working with pros who always, not one-offs, after every session will do extra, and they'll stay and they'll take 10 free kicks, and that's part of their routine, and they have it pre-established. Those are the players that go all the way, because you've been taught in your career to work harder. Always working harder gets you somewhere. But what I've learned probably over the recent times is it's actually habits that are formed, and I think the best players have like a schedule or a preset habit, and everything leads to something. They're doing it for a reason. So I think to sort of build them habits in young players is really important. But I do think you can see that desire and hunger that actually will always overtake talent.
Yeah, it's funny that where it was in any culture, everyone's looking for it. Do you think now with the now getting more experienced players that are coming, as much as you've got youth, you also have that the older pro. I mean, they're obviously showing the younger groups as well now in club settings how to go about. Has that been beneficial?
Absolutely. You look at, I'll use Man City women as an example, only because I've seen it firsthand when I went down there. Is you've got someone like Steph Horton, and she'd be the example I use every practice. We do extras in England, either before or after the session, where players can go and work on their own areas. And whether we've planned it or not, and we say, oh, well, today it's a bit lighter, Steph Horton wants to take 10 free kicks. That's her mindset. I turn up to City, it's exactly the same. She does it every single day. And then you've got young players coming through, Lauren Hemp, Georgia Stanway, in that environment. They see that. They know that means success. And I think, you know, at times we can be too eager to sort of write off older players. I think they've got a massive, massive role in actually forming the future of the next player. So I think if I go back to the Olympics with John in Rio for the second bronze medal, that's what he did really well. He blended the youth and the hunger with the sort of veterans who have all them values and hard work. And the women's game, you know, they've come through times where it wasn't where it is now. And I think put those two things together and actually you'll start to generate a culture that you need in the future.
Brilliant. Pressure, something that just goes along with, I mean, you have the home tournament, or the home country in 2015. England at a tournament anyway just equals pressure, but I think every coach today is under some form of it, either from themselves or from an AD or from a director of coaching. What do you think are some ways that coaches can help players deal with the pressure without lumping it on them?
I think how you approach the pressure is really important. I think, you know, it's a cliche really, but I think focusing on the process is really, really important. I think, you know, in recent times it's well known that the media in England with the England team's been, you know, there's been a lot of scrutiny there. And I think the danger is that with that, I don't think players can individually develop, or a team can develop, when you've got that much pressure if you let it in. And I think to progress and to sort of want to learn and be better, you've got to try and move that pressure away. And how you do that is focusing on the process, how individual sort of goals are leading to the next goal is really important. So if I was working with a young player who was feeling the pressure and going into a, I don't know, 50,000 crowd, which happens regularly at international football, I'd be focusing on what are your strengths, what makes you you. So I'll always say to players, you know, if you give the ball away in that moment, what's the one thing you bring to this team? Why you know, so let's say it's Lauren Hempert, she just blitz a fullback. And I'm saying, Lauren, next time you get the ball, just run. Just get at that fullback, because that's her identity and nobody can take that away from her. And I think that's the key, is making players confident, making them clear who they are, so that in those moments, no matter what's happening, they can control that and they can always go back to those big moments and apply what they do and do it well.
Brilliant. Matthew has asked the one we can always get, and it's always a really good one. Young coach wants to aspire. What advice would you have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what I've learned is different coaches take different paths. So, you know, you've got the sort of ex-player path, you've got the paths that where coaches have sort of had to, you know, study the game, and you've got other paths which it just sort of comes together, and you've got people who know people, and it's sort of, there's different doors that open. But I think if one door doesn't open, go and knock on the next door. That would be my key. The other thing would be brave. So in my career, I've moved to the other side of the world, to New Zealand, at the age of 21. I've taken big jobs that, you know, anybody on the outside might have said, is she ready for that? Young female in a male sort of world. So I think bravery is a big component of that. And I think know what you're good at. It's probably what I just said about the player and knowing your identity. I think know what you're good at and make that a super strength. I think we always try and sort of add to our weaknesses, and I always will. But I do think you have to know what your strength is and make it a super strength. And anybody you come into contact with, player, employees, whatever it might be, make sure they know that that's your super strength from very early on.
Fantastic. Joe always gives us a good question on these. The challenges with, so obviously monitoring physical performance, those IDPs whenever players are away.
Yeah.
Are there challenges with players that are abroad, Lucy, Nikita, Tony, who are dealing with foreign clubs and a different style of football?
Yeah, I think there'll always be, there's a lot of strengths and challenges. You know, we've been out to Leon in the example you've used, and it's culturally very, very different. But I think what the best players do, you know, I'll use an example, Lucy Bronze. I don't think it would matter what club she went to. She would maximise the environment she was in, because she'll do the extras, which I've spoke about. But I think it's actually really good. If I look at Nikita, she's from Liverpool, very homebody. She's gone out and been brave, which is something I just talked about. She's learning the language. She's been in an uncomfortable setting. She's got out of her comfort zone. So I think it's actually adding to them as people, not just players. But I think there is challenges. There'll always be challenges based on their environment. And I think the culture we would try and create is no matter control what you can control.
Rob's asked a good one. I don't know why I didn't think of this. The difference in quality of opposition in 2015, 2019, where did you see the tactical progressions or physical progressions in the overall tournament?
Yeah, I think more high-speed runs would be the physical progression. So it's a bit of emphasis we've been putting on with our players is, can we get more high-speed runs? And then I think the second thing is, you would have seen teams were defensively way more solid, less goals were scored. So I think you have to be more tactically adaptable with the ball, more rotations. I think that the game is way more tactical and way more physical. And I think, you know, going to the next World Cup, it'll be even tougher for you know, there was one big scoreline that was a bit of a blowout, but other than that, it was really tight.
Brilliant. Let's see. Gabe's asked about going back to that half time, about, you said, the positively impacting the game. How do you I talk about processes. How would you then review that process after the game to know whether that was a successful halftime team talk or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. And probably some of our processes were born out of those reviews that we did. I can always remember it was my first camp with England. We were actually qualified for the World Cup under quite a bit of pressure. And actually our half time, the reality of where we were, we actually had to have our half time outside, just through the nature of the stadium, which is not something that you generally used to. And after that, we did a big review about what that looked like. So I think match day +1, we always do a game day review. How did it go? What were the subs like? Were the subs right? Halftime process. I just think it's part of that evolving cycle, because there's always a situation every tournament that hasn't happened to you before, and then you plan for it for the next one.
Yeah. When would that, because I'm always curious on that, like when is there a cooling off period between the game? Like when does the staff kind of reconvene and go through that detailed review?
Yeah, I think everyone's different. So if I speak about the goalkeeping coach who I work with in England, he has to watch the game that night, as an example. I'm the opposite. I can get up at 4 o'clock the next morning, fresh as a daisy, to review the game. So I think, again, it's adapting to how people, I have to come down before I can go back up again. So I think generally what we'll do is we'll have to meet the night match day +1 evening, because then you start planning your next 3 days, the squad, the game review, which we're presenting to the players, because we've all gone away and watched it in our relevant areas. So that cooling off period's probably the next morning, sort of midday, and then that evening you're in again. But in all reality, in a tournament setting, you don't get much time. You get your evening, but then you've got your tasks to get on with. But collectively as a group, it's probably the night after.
Where have you seen the biggest growth in support staff? Has it been on the physical side, the analysis side? Like where have staffs been expanded?
Well, actually, in my current setup, I would say it's actually been more media, commercial, like, because the game's become more professional. There's much more media presence at tournaments, etc. For me personally, being at the 2011 World Cup with New Zealand to now 2019, the difference in what was needed to be able to deliver a high performance sort of program was totally different. And I would say that side's definitely has more. You know, you've got players who have sponsorship deals, who have requests left, right and centre in the middle of a tournament. You've got to manage that. I think that side on the women's game's been a big shift. And then you're right, like the physiology, psychology, analysis. I think analysts have a massive role to play. I know for sure if I was to go on somewhere tomorrow, that'd be a massive part of getting someone to get the best out of me, would be someone I could trust on that analysis side, really.
Brilliant. Okay, last couple. You've kind of answered this, but maybe a different twist. What advice from Chloe? What advice would you have for a young female coach trying to make it in the female game?
Yeah, I think I've sort of answered around know who you are, know what you bring. I think confidence is massive. And I do think confidence in our game can be really high and really low. And you can feel on top of the world 1 minute and bottom of the world the next. I would say try not to get too high and too low, and sort of, enjoy the moments, of course. But I think that sort of level-headedness around your own confidence, and know what breeds confidence and what doesn't. Over time, the more you know yourself, you know that certain things you need to do to make sure that you stay confident, but at the same time, when to be confident and when to develop yourself, and trying to get the balance right.
Brilliant. Last one for me then. You mentioned there about knowing yourself and then this break. I mean, has there been key areas that you've looked to improve or learn a bit more about individually, or have you just been doing as many as possible?
Do you know what? I was saying this before we got on air, that this is probably the first time in my career, actually, I've worked in full-time football from the age of sort of 21 and have been to major tournaments, national organisations, where it's just go, go, go. This is the first chance I've had to really stop. I've reflected a lot. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, leadership, high performance, and just varied. I used to read a lot, but because I've got a little one, you find less time. But a podcast you can do while you're washing the dishes. as an example. So I definitely reflected a lot, and I've listened to a lot of different ways of doing things. So I wouldn't say I've done anything in a specific area. I've sort of gone after a whole raft of things, and just, you always have to sharpen. I think what happens is, if you're not careful, you get into it on a hamster wheel where you go and you go and you go because you don't have time. I think sharpening up is what I've learned. I probably need to schedule that in my year, in my own development, to say, right, I'm going to take this period to just sharpen again. I've really enjoyed it.
You must enjoy the accessibility with the women's game growing what it is, and obviously those environments getting better, and then also the men's game in the Premier League and even the Championship, rugby. I mean, it is England is a fantastic place to get those little workshops here and there.
Absolutely, I've listened to Brendan Rodgers. At the LMA, I've been on a few webinars again in this period. Went to the Champions League before, with Chelsea Bayern. Had to do a sort of study for my pro license with that, and work with some great coaches from England and around the world. So I do think it is the football culture that sort of I've been out of. There's totally different ways out. For example, even looking at the men's side in the England setup, the men's youth coaches, they have in and out of possession specialist coaches, tapping into them. Like, I think it's a great really hub to tap into lots of knowledge.
Fantastic. Bev, thank you so much. We're out of time. This has been phenomenal. We've moved in a couple of different directions, the bench, your development, and then player development as well. So hopefully we'll see you out on the pitch again very, very soon. I bet you're dying to get out there. So really appreciate you giving up your afternoon with the family and giving us some insight.
No, I really appreciate it, Gary. Thank you. Keep up the good work.